There we go. So wanted to welcome you all tonight to the Saga Workshop Series. Thanks for being with us this Tuesday night. We're gonna have a really great evening. Pat's got some awesome information for all of you. Wanted to just cover some ground rules real quick, or guidelines, I guess, if you will, before we get started. Per usual, our microphones are muted just because as people come and go, we can get a lot of people on and a lot of people talking at one time. So we want to make sure that everyone can be heard. So if you want to go ahead and pop in with a question, use that chat feature. I know in Pat's presentation, he's built in some Q&A at the end, so we'll be able to take questions that way for sure at the end, so we can get to your questions. So please, if you would like to use your video, absolutely go ahead and do that. We love seeing where everyone's at and where you're hanging out. Just be mindful of your surroundings, especially with that microphone feature. Leave that off because we can get a little bit loud sometimes too if we're in the houses. So just make sure your video and your microphone, you're keeping an eye on those. And like I said, there will be some Q&A at the end. So save up your questions, or if you're afraid you'll forget, write them down, type them in that chat. We'll absolutely get to them by the end of this. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and give some control over to Pat Thornton. He's got an awesome write-up of his biography there. Pat, I'll have you introduce yourself, talk a little about what you do professionally and also your connection to the organization. And I will give you control to go ahead and take over.
Okay. Well, thanks, Cassie, for getting this organized. And she told me beforehand this is her first time to have total control of this. So my first time to do this with SIGTAW as well. So hopefully we'll we'll do it okay. So yeah, I'm president of a little company. It's really a one-person operation called Leadership Concepts. Just a side thing that I do, putting on what we call benchmarking meetings. I'm in the propane gas industry, so I have some meetings with propane gas company owners, and we just share ideas. But another thing I'm getting into is doing more presentations like what we're going to do tonight. It's what we're going to talk about tonight is really based on an 8-hour presentation, but we'll spare you 7 hours and 15 minutes of that and just hit some of the highlights. So I'm a grad at Truman State, Beta chapter, was involved in IFC, was treasurer of the Fraternity, was on Student Senate, did a number of things on campus during my time there, was a Dent Man of the Year finalist in '91, and still living the SIGTAW for Life motto as treasurer of our Getzy Foundation at Beta chapter, where we write checks to the undergrads for scholarships. So it's kind of a fun job to reward some of our top performers when they deserve it. So so this program is called Leading Passionate Teams, and 20 years ago, let's see, I'm going to try to continue here. Let's see if that works. Oh, see, moving to the next screen. There we go. So this program, and I've tailored a little bit to the fraternity, but the program was designed by a gentleman named Jim Lucas, who's given many seminars in his life, and we have an agreement that we're putting together that I'll be able to do some of his seminars in the future. And he's written a number of books about leadership. So a man with a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge and ideas to share. But he's, I believe, semi-retired right now and not doing the seminars, but I felt that he still had a great message, and I think he and his team would like that message to continue to be shared, even if he ultimately retires from this. 20 years ago, I joined a company called Propane Resources. A gentleman who was the founder of that company, Dwayne Willingham, was the leader for 10 of my 20 years, but unfortunately he had a heart attack and died suddenly one day. But in the first 10 years that I was with the company, certainly learned a lot from him and some of the philosophies he had. He had some concepts that were totally opposed to the corporate world. He came out of the corporate world, and I think was ready to do something new and different, where he'd be a leader of his own operation. And he had some concepts like the people he hired He wanted people who walked on water and washed windows. So people who were willing to do just about anything to make the company successful. And he talked about passion a lot, and he talked about wanting people with the right attitude. And his motto, one of his mottos, was higher attitude, train skills. So he felt like it'd be easier to bring somebody up to speed uh, if they had to learn skills rather than they had to have an attitude adjustment. So that was a theme, and he really emphasized that he didn't want to scare people away from joining the organization by having unnecessary boxes, unnecessary rules and regulations. Uh, as an example, he would say, you know, we're in the propane business, but if the right person with the right attitude walks in the door, and he always named this person Fred Frizzle Frazzle. He said, if Fred Frizzle Frazzle walks in the door and says, all I want to do is paint houses pink. Dwayne said, well, if he's got a good attitude and he can make us money painting houses pink, we're going to figure out a way to make it happen with Fred and us working together. So he was just kind of unique in those ways, and I like to think that more people are moving to models like that and getting away from some of the maybe you know tired old corporate policies and ways of doing things that really burn people out and make them want to switch jobs faster, move somewhere else, only to find maybe that's not where they want to be either. So you spend a lot of time at work in your life, and it's just important that you enjoy what you're doing at work. And Jim Lucas, who put this program together, said he always hates to hear people talk about their life versus their professional life, because he feels like if their professional life has to be distinguished from their life, that means that it's just something they have to do to have a life. It's not something that can be considered part of their life. Um, so that's something to keep in mind too. That if you don't enjoy what you're doing, you really need to look at what your options are, because you spend a lot of time in your professional career throughout a lifetime. So. Um, with propane resources, we were definitely not top down. His philosophy: no walls, no titles, no corporate structure, no major policies and procedures. He felt if you hired the right people, that all of that everything would fall into place, and that played out a lot of the time. Maybe not 100% of the time. Over 20 years, I can assure you that there were some glitches in that philosophy. So. Um, Moving on, the fraternity is like a little red wagon, is my next slide, and that's something that I definitely pulled myself from my experience with the fraternity. Um, I feel like joining a fraternity is going away to college. Joining a fraternity is that next step in life where suddenly you don't have or need as much, we hope, adult supervision. So um, I think in the spirit of trying to wean off of adult supervision, and some fraternity members do it a lot better than others, but every fraternity typically has an advisor, and our advisor was Walt Ryle. And he really tried to be hands off. He really tried to let us run our own show and not dictate or have a lot of authoritarian philosophy over the fraternity. He would sit in the back of our meeting room, read his newspaper, and the only clue you had that something wasn't quite right, or Walt heard something that he didn't like, was you'd hear his newspaper crinkle just a little bit, and that a lot of us kind of understood that Walt's not really happy with what he just heard, but that was about the only sign that we ever had from Walt that he didn't particularly care for something that was being said. But then there were times where, and it maybe only happened once a semester, where Walt not only crinkled the paper, but decided he needed to stand up and say something. And on one particular night, we were having a lot of debate over, everybody doing their part versus everybody getting to be part of the fraternity. And there was a lot of griping about, people not being allowed to come to parties because they hadn't paid their dues, or and that was a common theme. And I'm sure we weren't the only chapter in that boat. And so Walt had heard enough. There was just too many people griping that, hey, you're not letting the brothers come to the parties. Girls and even non-fraternity members are coming into our parties. Now, this was back in the 80s. I know there's more rules now, but he was, he'd heard enough, and he stood up and said, "Gentlemen, I need you to realize that the fraternity is really like a little red wagon," he said. "When you have a little red wagon, you have people who want to ride in the wagon and people who are willing to pull the wagon. And every organization, fraternity, every organization you'll be part of in life is like this little red wagon. Here's when you have a problem, gentlemen. When there are too many people in the wagon and not enough people pulling the wagon, an interesting thing happens. The wagon quits moving." And he said, "And sometimes you get to a point where everybody's in the wagon and nobody's pulling, and the wagon stops. And that's where you may find yourselves right now." So we discussed, how do we get the wagon moving again? So, but life is really like that. Everything that you do in life is like that little red wagon. Just a minute here. I'm trying to move to the next slide. It didn't change. Are you able to move it, Cassie? Okay. So I'm from Kansas City, so I have to put up a picture of the Kansas City Chiefs. Cassie's from this area too, so she'll appreciate this. But it's all about teamwork, and Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs were the right team this year to get the job done, winning the Super Bowl. Those of us in Kansas City who've been around the city our whole lives have had a lot of disappointing postseasons, and maybe something was just a little bit off that we couldn't get very far in the postseason, but finally made it happen this year. So I think Patrick Mahomes is a great example of someone. He's only 25 years old, but he really knows how to motivate the other players and get everybody excited, and bring an infusion of passion into the team, and get everybody wanting to be on the same page and make things happen. And that's just a great example in Kansas City of what teamwork is all about. So we got to have our first celebration in 50 years in Kansas City after many frustrating seasons. But sadly, I have to note that unfortunately, we were really looking forward to hosting Sigma Tau Gamma here for the centennial celebration. And darn it, we've earned it as a national fraternity, getting to 100 years. But I put this slide up just because it reminded me of a sign that was always on my mom's kitchen, right above the sink of the kitchen. It said, "Life is what happens to you while you are making other plans." So in life, no matter how well everything comes together, something throws a wrench in somewhere. And as team leaders, unfortunately, even though life isn't fair, we just have to accept that life's not fair. We have to improvise, we have to adapt, and somewhat adapting tonight by having a webinar instead of speaking live in Kansas City. And so this is the next best thing. So we'll be able to share this not only tonight, but the videos will be available to others. And I think it's a great way to share the collective ideas of the fraternity. Okay, so I'm going to try the next slide, but I need to go to the next slide. It's not. Okay, there we go. So teamwork is important to make the fraternity successful. It's important to make your career successful. It's important to make your family successful. It's just a key part of your life. And for a lot of the guys in the fraternity, of course, teamwork now and fraternity projects, but a program like this can help get you thinking about teamwork in your career, teamwork in your future, and teamwork as you have a family. And you may not even realize, having grown up in a family, how much mom and dad are team leaders until you have your own kids and your own family. And and realized, wow, mom and dad did a lot more than I remember. So, making everything happen at the house. So okay, so we can move to the next screen. Um, So leaders have a very difficult assignment. It's a way to tap into, we need to find a way to tap into the individual passion of each team member and to merge them all in a tightly focused direction. So let's discuss how to design and build and lead passionate teams that deliver results. Okay, so next slide. Um, what is passion? We define passion in part as a choice to be wholeheartedly committed to achieve results and adding value. It's working with enthusiasm, energy, and vigor to build something excellent. And passion can include emotion, but it's more than emotion and rah rah. It's more than a feeling. It's getting things done. So people that are very quiet sometimes are some of the most passionate people out there. So it's more characterized by their focus and their persistence uh, than their observable behaviors. So the people who jump up and down and scream to get everybody excited, that's great. But if they don't really do a lot of the background work or lay the groundwork, the nitty gritty to make things happen, their passion is somewhat limited. So next slide is collaboration. So that's everybody working together, the willingness to work closely with others to produce real results that are significantly greater than could be produced alone. So it includes investing in others and their work to yield a better overall performance, even if this means that some of my time, energy, resources, or goals, it requires a willingness to I'm sorry, sometimes I can't. Okay. To give up constructive dissent, participate positively in constructive conflict, work through negative conflict, avoid false consensus, and accept consensus only when the team's diversity has been fully mined for value. So it's a hidden engine of all great teams. So next slide, we'll talk about the decision to join a team or the decision to put somebody on a team is extremely important. So it can be a greatest decision of your life. It can be a worst decision of your life. And it doesn't matter what team we're talking about, the fraternity, a career decision, marriage, whatever. It can be good decisions. It can be bad decisions. For me personally, I remember joining Sigma Tau Gamma during the second week of being at college. And after I signed the paper and was walking back to campus, um, it suddenly dawned on me. I had a little epiphany. I said, I'm going to be here at least 4 years, but this might be the biggest decision, the best decision I make the entire 4 years I'm in college. It just felt that important to get involved with that organization, and it was. So I'm sure some of you have feelings about the day you joined the fraternity, and I'll ask the question of you: do you feel it was the best decision you made during your entire college experience? And I'll be very honest and say, absolutely, for me. And I thought about it a lot of times. Those 4 years where I'd walk back to campus from the house, and I'd be about where I was when I thought that the first time I joined the fraternity, and I'd say, "Have you made a more important decision since that decision?" And nope. And all through graduation, I decided that was the best decision I made during the college years. And of course, there'd be other decisions I made in life after that. But I think during college, joining the fraternity for experience and real life and leadership and things like that, there was a lot more learning I felt in the fraternity than in a lot of the classes I took in college. So next slide. So we'll talk some here for a little bit about the 7 core reasons that teams fail. So the first one we call missing answers, and so that's poor or undeveloped answers to the really big questions, along with little diversity of thought. So with missing answers, we realize that things things can always go wrong, and some of the things that we're missing answers to are, uh, what are we supposed to do? How do we access diversity of thought? Why are we here? What are we doing? Where do we want to go? If we don't really know the answers to those questions, our team is probably headed down the wrong path. Next slide. Um, Overly broad focus is spending too much time on the wrong things. So, activities that don't have much value, methods more than results, and allowing the team to become distracted. So, sometimes in an overly broad focused group, you have people trying to be all things to all people, people spending too much time on the wrong things. You find yourself one day sorting through 200 emails that are not really pertinent to the focus of your team, and you find a lot of distraction in your day. So, next slide is silo structures. So, this is the concept where everybody on the team thinks they have what they are supposed to do. And I'm in my area, don't bother me. I'll stay out of your area. You focus on your area. But really, the group doesn't need to be with everyone in their own silo. The group needs to be in a semi permeable membrane where everybody interacts. And that was the concept that Dwayne, my former boss, had in having a more open concept at the company. So, next slide is low participation, and every organization can relate to that at some point in time. And that's just too many people saying whatever. What shall we do? There's a lack of power sharing. There's a lot of people who don't really like the word empowerment. They're just maybe they're just along for the ride in the wagon. So next slide is about non-leading leaders. So there are a lot of leaders out there who are like the hood ornament on a car. They lead the car, but they're really not controlling anything. So these are leaders who like to receive respect. They don't really necessarily show respect. They're not really good at giving you direction or their thoughts on how to do something. But boy, they can be a Monday morning quarterback all day long about what you did wrong. So that's an example of a non-leading leader. One more thought on the non-leading leader is, somebody described a leader who said, "Okay, I'll be I'm the leader of your organization, but if things are going well, you won't see much of me. You'll just see me around if things aren't going well." So, you know, think of it this way: who's going to be delighted to see this guy ever? Because he's already laid the groundwork that, hey, you know, you're only going to see me if things are going wrong. So yeah, you got to think about making comments like that. So moving on to the sixth one, a reactionary mindset. That's waiting for change from the outside to take action, and often it's too late to take action by the time everybody realizes that, hey, things are screwed up here. So, and number seven, moving on to that one. Reality distortion, a refusal to find, face, and define, align with, and where possible, change reality. These are the people who have a very fuzzy view of what is actually going on, and that is always a problem. So, next slide, we'll start talking about the seven keys to effective teams, and each of the seven keys challenges one of those seven core reasons that teams fail. And you'll notice that our seven keys spell the word victors along the left side of the screen. So vision versus missing answers, intelligence versus overly broad focus, cohesion versus silo structure, tools versus low participation, openness versus non-leading leaders, results versus reactionary mindset, and sustainability versus the reality distortion. So next we'll talk about the first key, which is vision. Um, So average or mediocre leaders ignore the importance of these cultural drivers, and they dismiss them as trivial, soft, touchy-feely. Anytime they go into a meeting and someone starts wanting to talk about, well, vision, mission, values, some of these people just tune out thinking that's a waste of time to talk about that. We got to talk about our immediate problem at hand today, which is, you know, why this truck won't start or whatever the issue is. Um, so it's important though to not lose sight of and to keep focused as a team on the vision, why we exist and where we are going, the mission, what we must do to achieve our vision and when we will do it, values and behaviors, which give us the how we will behave and relate, and strategy, which gives us the how we will execute and deliver the results. So next we'll talk about intelligence, which is the way to get consistent focused and ensure that team focus remains strong. So it's defining what wins look like. The team must be continually reminded of how they will know if they've won. Embed the commander's intent with unlimited distractions. Team members need to have a crystal clear, concise summary of expectations, and create a collaborative game plan. Just like that sports team has a certain identity, but still customizes its plans for the next opponent. So the team must customize its plan at every new transition point or milestone. So next is cohesion. And so this is the alternative to the silo structures. It's that organic semi-permeable membrane, which we need to have a boundary around the team. So it's got that strong identity where we feel like us, we feel like we have this team spirit. It's permeable both ways. So there's necessary guidance and correction can come from, just a second here, outside the team, and necessary updating or requests for support can come from inside the team. So next is tools, and tools are very important. They're, I think, the alternative to the low participation. So they can produce great results, but if left to their own devices, tend to fall to mediocrity, the lowest common denominator. So to avoid these, we need to decide the type of team we need to apply to a specific opportunity or problem, have effective consensus management, have effective conflict management, and have unavoidable accountability. So next is openness, getting communication that counts. The team must know how to team talk, to know the difference between dialogue and discussion, get an agreement on the quality of information first, the value of the data and its contribution to helping team members create value, and then get an agreement on the quantity of information, eliminate the need to know on the one hand and the need to keep everyone informed on the other. And next, results is building a team that wins, and we've got the acronym SCORE: selection, competence, opposition, and we'll talk a little bit more about opposition in a few minutes, but the concept is it's good to have harmony on a team, but it's not good to have too much harmony to the point where nobody speaks up if they think something's wrong or wants to challenge something or feels they can't challenge something. So we'll get into that in just a few minutes here. And finally, we have sustainability, which is building a charter action team. And that team kind of oversees the team to make sure that it stays relevant, it stays important to the cause. Henry Ford said, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is a process, and working together is a success. So now we'll talk about developing real emotional firepower. And the passionate teams are different, not just in degree than simply talented teams. There's a qualitative difference. The difference comes from tapping into the passion, energy, and enthusiasm of at least 95% of team members. And so it's a goal that Jim felt was the right number, to have 95% of the members who care, even before we worry about getting into what they contribute, just that they care. And we want people to invest themselves into the team and to create significant levels of team capital. So in a class, sometimes, like when you're in school, you'll have those class members that always act up and cause problems. And it's good that the teacher not dwell too much on them, but give the attention to the 95% that are behaving and doing what they're supposed to, and not letting this sideshow in the corner take over the day. And so it's the same concept here with the real emotional firepower. We've got to not let the disgruntled and the disillusioned people of the group take over. Sometimes they can dominate a meeting or dominate a group to its destruction. And it's been noted that the terms disgruntled and disillusioned are interesting in that they've made a name for themselves, but there really is not a word gruntled and there's not a word illusioned. So there's only the dis of those. Teams building is the next thing we'll talk about, which you'll notice the extra S in what used to be team building. And the concept of teams building is the fact that for whatever you're trying to accomplish, you may need to first decide the type of team and the type of people that will be on that team before you can really get going. And using sports as another analogy, once again, or music or acting. Think in terms of baseball. A lot of what happens in baseball is very individualistic. Batting, how you perform in your position out on the field. Same way with music. A soloist, obviously, they're part of a team, but they take center stage for part of the concert. Acting, you've got the cinema, which is an individualistic role. Then, as you get into football, you get more coordinated. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes and the team they have to pull themselves together and strategize every few minutes. Whereas on the baseball team, you don't get the whole team together to strategize usually even during the whole game, except for maybe uh, once or twice. But in football, it's pretty darn regular. And so, in looking at the business you work in, and that's gone a lot into here during COVID. Whether people can work from home or whether they have to get together at the office a certain number of times a week or month, do conference calls, Zoom calls. The type of team and what the team has to accomplish is dictated in a lot of ways by how often they have to confer about strategy for the next move. And if there's a lot of individualistic things going on, then yeah, your team may not have to meet very often at all. But if there's got to be a new strategy and everybody's part of it, it's a whole different situation. So then the third one is creative. In basketball, jazz band, and improvisation are examples there where it's just a little nuanced difference, I think, from coordinated, but it involves more creativity into the strategy. So that's the concept behind teams building and why it's important. Um, then next we'll talk about the team performance agreement, and Jim is very big on this in throughout the process of having a team. He feels like that a team needs to develop its performance agreement on the front end of doing whatever they're going to do. And if this is done right, they can really do some monumental things. And he's mentioned that sometimes he'll run into somebody he worked with 20 years ago, and they may immediately say, "Oh yeah, I still think back quite often to that time we all worked together on such and such project, and boy, we really." It was touch and go there for a while, but we really made it happen. And it's things like that you remember throughout an entire career that you were part of a team, and everybody pulled together, made things happen. And some of the things that need to be agreed on are the results to be achieved by the team and by individual members, resources to be allocated, used, restrictions to be observed. And then, okay, we'll go to the next one. And there's three more: risks to be allowed and taken, the safety net that needs to be supplied by senior team leadership in some cases, responsibility to other people, internal and external, for communication, reporting, etc., and accountability. And then that return on human investment to be achieved, the return to be expected by the team and the individual members for good performance. So next we'll go to um, the effective consensus management, and here's where we get into conflict and consensus. And he asks the question, "What are you doing to manage consensus so it doesn't get out of hand?" Doesn't that question seem a little backwards? And again, he's talking about too many yes men, too many people who just go along with somebody who's dominant in the group and not challenging things. So most organizations worry about managing the conflict, but the deadlier enemy to the long-term success of the group is unhealthy consensus. So we want to create value-add consensus, and we have to understand the wrong reasons why people might agree to something, and then there should be consensus only if they actually do agree with us or the direction that's being taken. So we'll move on to the um, false versus genuine harmony. The false harmony is phony agreement, shallow agreement, undue deference to authority, unwillingness to confront, fear of the team's displeasure, lack of knowledge or breadth. And then the genuine is more the concept of unity with diversity, insistence on disagreement, freedom forums, leadership safety nets, seeing the advantages of disagreement and information thoroughness and time. So we'll move on to um, conflict principles. So conflict is very normal, and as Jim points out in his program, uh, if you don't like conflict, you got a problem, because there's only one place where humans gather with no conflict, and that's the graveyard. That is after we are alive. We will have conflict in our lives throughout. It's a part of life. Every book you read has a conflict that has to be resolved. Every sitcom creates awkward situations, conflicts, situations that need a resolution, and it's all got to be done in 30 minutes and allow time for commercials. So conflict is everywhere. And if you simply seek to avoid conflict, you are seeking really to avoid life. So get used to conflict if you're not. um, so great leaders control the stress levels in their areas of responsibility. Conflict can be desirable when controlled, but it's the goal to have uh, constructive dissent if there's going to be dissent. So we'll move on to constructive dissent, um, which is realizing that no growth occurs if everyone goes along to get along. Conflict stirs things up, reduces apathy, makes people reevaluate opinions. The concept leads us to deliberate, structure projects, meetings, and discussion to produce positive and useful dissent. It requires balance, unity, and diversity. One leader called constructive dissent creative abrasion. So it's good to have this constructive dissent, and it's good to have a team that likes to challenge each other, and they're adult enough to have these conflicts um, and talk them through and share why I think this, why Bob thinks that, Mary thinks this, and then try to come to some consensus. So next we'll talk about ground rules of constructive dissent. So everyone agrees first on the mission or goals to be achieved to prevent random frontier battles. We disagree with ideas, not people. And I think that's something I've always found to be important in dissent is make sure everybody knows you respect them as people. You just are a little bit on a different page on the best way to approach something. And a lot of times you've been down this path before, maybe they haven't, or vice versa, and you can share, well, here's what happened when we tried this 5 years ago, and that might change their way of thinking. And it's through that kind of mature discussion that that you can move the needle on getting everyone to be on the same page and in agreement. So it's good to make an ongoing record of all the victories that you achieve in discussions like this. And it's good to have a trained facilitator who can change the topic or call a timeout if conversation becomes too unproductive, too heated. So, next we'll talk about ending uncontrolled conflict. So that's when it does get out of hand. Move quickly, deal with the conflict immediately. It never just goes away. And sometimes you can get some really hurt feelings. You can get people who are really, ready to quit, not be part of this team anymore. So look for some of the root causes of the problems. Handle the problems face to face. Too often, people in the day and age of email, hide behind text. Oh, I'll send them a nasty email, then they'll have to think about that for a day. Well, no, that just gets people all irritated. Better to be adult about it and really get a discussion going. I think we're all guilty. I think we've all sent that email that we wished we could pull back 5 seconds after we sent it. I've had a number of emails in my life where, fortunately, I deleted the whole thing 5 seconds before I was about to hit send, and that usually works out. That usually works for the better. It's good to let them know. It's good to have the conversation. Don't shy away from the conflict, but yeah, the nasty email can really hurt feelings and cause some problems long term. So consider the personalities of people involved. Explore but control feelings and emotions. Make clear observations and assessments, ask for input and propose solutions. There's a 5-question rule about conflict that you can walk through. It involves, asking people just to discuss how they deal with conflict, kind of back out of the current conflict, but just discuss conceptually how they deal with conflict, a time in the past when they had a conflict, a time in the past when they had a difference of opinion on something, a time in the past when they had an unhappy customer. And those are some of the things that you can ask and just have a discussion about conflict. Maybe as a form of a timeout on the current situation, just to maybe break the ice a little bit, get to know this person you're having a conflict with, and then when you're ready, resume the argument or the discussion, whichever you want to call it. So then on to effective group negotiation. So here it's important that everyone makes clear their assumptions, ensure that everyone makes clear their needs and goals, use dialogue rather than discussion, major on the major, so stay on the big topics, don't get down into the nitty gritty more than you should. Have everyone state what they are willing to give up, and that's really important. And then it's also important that you continue the dialogue and negotiation until everyone is a little unhappy, and that means everyone gave something up. So now moving on to documenting your agreement. So then we have the passion chart for teams, and if you've ever read the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you'll recognize this chart. And it's very simple concept, but it's so smart. Doesn't it make sense to have people in a company sit down and write out, put in these 4 quadrants? Here's what I like and here's what I do well. Here's what I don't like but do well. Here's what I like and don't do well. And finally, here's what I don't like and what I don't do well. And hopefully, you can trade jobs with some people, or at least trade some of the roles at your company or in the fraternity, by just knowing what people like to do and don't like to do well, and don't like to do or don't do well. This can involve some training, so that if you like something but don't do it well, you might come up to speed and then move into the like and do well category, which would be awesome. If it's something you don't like but do well, you might decide there's some way to learn to like it. But at any rate, this is just a great tool for sharing jobs. Now, if you find you've created a team and everybody falls in the don't like and don't do well category, you've got a bit of a problem. in a company, that's an HR problem. In a fraternity, I think in the vernacular of a fraternity, that means probably didn't have as good a rush season as we thought we did. So, okay, so moving on to kind of getting to the wrap up here about just what are the characteristics of the leader who builds passionate teams. I think they're people who push their organizations to face, define, align with, and change reality. They change the way that people think and talk. They don't make or take excuses or wait for saving events, but they lead the way on positive discontent. They think of themselves as organizational designers. They have the right view of people. They know that leadership and management are applied to completely different things, and that's something that we didn't get into much. But the concept there is that leaders lead people, but managers manage things, and people don't like to be managed. It's like, get your grubby mitts off of me. I don't want to be managed. Lead me, give me good advice, but get away. So we can move on to, okay, leaders attract, retain, and maximize the number and the performance of winners and believers. They treat power as a tool, not a goal, and use it to liberate rather than to dominate. So they live by the rule of the 95 and 5, and they provide passionate leadership that builds trust. And I think that was the last one. Yep. So now, just any questions and discussion that anybody has, thoughts,
I went
experiences.
ahead or allowed people to unmute themselves if they have questions. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah, if anybody has a question or a thought, this is the time.
Yes, Pat. My name is Eric Schieser. I am a alumni member of Sigma Tau Gamma, specifically from the Kappa chapter at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. And I don't have any really comments. I just had, or any questions. I had comments. I really like how you collaborated some of the skills of like collaboration and adaptability and critical thinking into building passionate teams. I think this is a key skill and concept that not just the provisional chapters, but also the charter chapters of Sigma Tau Gamma can use going forward, whether it's recruitment, event planning, philanthropy, any aspect of the fraternity within their individual chapters. So thank you very much, Pat, for your insights for all of us as brothers.
Sure. Absolutely. You're welcome.
I also thought another comment too, though, but I thought the chart, the passionate teams chart, I just saw that, and Eric, you chime in too, but I totally saw that as, we have chapters that have executive cabinets of people in charge of things, but we have other guys in chapters that I think want to get involved, but they aren't sure how, and they don't want to take on a big responsibility. And so I think about chapters who have guys that want to get involved, but they don't know to what degree. That I just think that's such an awesome tool for that. So I thought that was great. I did have a question though, as well, Pat. You talked about using dialogue versus discussion. Can you talk about the difference in those two, or what that looks like?
Well, I think that the concept there is to, with discussion, it just can go off down so many different paths. With dialogue, it's more focused. It's got a process to it, and that may not be the best answer. There may be a few more details that I'm not thinking of, but in a nutshell, I think that dialogue is a very focused process to resolve matters, whereas discussion can just take a number of turns and get off subject, and nothing get resolved, and that can be a problem in a lot of meetings where you have the meeting, and I think it's great that people try to put a time limit on a meeting to a large degree, but there's times where you get to the 59th minute and there's no action plan, and not including when to have the next meeting. So nobody knows what to do next other than wait till somebody calls another meeting. And it's nice if you can wrap up a meeting with some action plans that that I think are more the result of dialogue than discussion, where things get too off course. So
That makes sense. That's
so
great.
yeah, but yeah, I could definitely see where some of these concepts would apply in a fraternity, in any on-campus organization. But like I said at the beginning, I think everything in here can apply to any organization, nonprofit, business, whatever, where you've got to have people come together. And then on that subject, getting back to you were talking about Erica and Cassie about recruiting people to do something in the fraternity. Sometimes it's a matter of asking the people, and that goes for life. There's a lot of people who are willing to volunteer their time, but there's something special about being asked. Like, wow, somebody saw somebody saw in me the maybe some skills I don't even see in myself, and and that's true. But it's also true they're just trying to fill a position and get some things done. But you know, um, but I think sometimes people are really honored to be asked, and it's important to ask people to do something in a volunteer situation. And then, I've also seen a presentation about volunteers, and at a certain point, they're not getting the job done. And how do you fire a volunteer? And that's a whole different question. But that's another process in some organizations. That it's the success of getting the right person on the team. But yeah, you got to deal sometimes with the failure of having the wrong person on the team, and why keep compounding those failures, because they may be a great person, but sometimes people's passions change, they get pulled in too many directions, and they feel bad about resigning from a particular position. But really it would be better if they resigned. In a perfect world, they find their replacement and say, hey, I don't have time for this anymore, but I went out and found Cassie, and she said she would be more than delighted to take on this role. And any leader loves to hear that. Hey, the guy wasn't getting it done. He not only realized it and realized he should get out, but he took the time to find somebody who he recommended could get the job done. Because a lot of times these people who are failing, it's not because they're bad at it, because originally they were perhaps good at it, but sometimes life, that old adage, life is what happens while you're making other plans, can get in the way, and it's time to move on, and deal with what you really need to deal with in your life at that time. So